welcome to the virtual jazz piano portion of the Middle School Honor Jazz Combo Day. Thanks for being here. My name is Nick Ruckert, and I am a piano player and a teacher in Ankeny, the Ankeny band director in the Ankeny School District. So I'm hopeful that this will be of some help to you as you start or continue your jazz endeavors. In years past, there's been a variety of students that have gone to this. Sometimes they just joined jazz band, a few days before that, and other times they've been there for a number of years, and they've been to that same event a couple of times, and they've taken lessons and anywhere in between. And so my hope is that throughout any of these videos, that I'll meet you wherever you are. So if you're absolutely brand new, I'll try to help you with some things to help you move you along. If you've been to this before, maybe you can get something new that you haven't gotten in the past. So it would be helpful for you to have on you, if you have a couple of handouts that were posted, the outline. It kind of looks like this, that I posted on there. There's a lead sheet, a melody and chords sheet to Tenor Madness, which is the tune I played just a bit ago. And also some blank staff paper would be great. Instead of giving you, like a handout with all of that stuff on it, I thought it'd be better to kind of work together with you on the video, and then you can, hit pause when you need to and do your work, do the math, and then I think it kind of sticks better in your brain if you're the one that actually writes it in rather than if I just give you a handout with it. So that's kind of the idea. Okay, so before we even get into the three different videos topics, the first thing is it's kind of helpful to know how this might be different playing jazz piano in a combo than it would be in a jazz band. So up till now in jazz band, your music was probably all written out. All the notes were written out, all the rhythms were written out. But in a jazz combo, most of everything is not written out. And even so, a lot of times as you get older, people just have absolutely everything is memorized. But for now, as we're learning it, some of that stuff is written down. But even then, it's only the melody that's written out, and the chords are written out. I should say the symbols are there, but the actual things that you play are not there. The rhythms you play are not there. The notes you're not playing. The notes you play are not there either. So there's stuff that we need to do as piano players to figure out what it is that we actually play. The first thing on your sheet is just kind of a laundry list of what happens in a jazz combo song, and you'll notice that's a little different than how it is in a big band. So you have a possible intro to start it, in my case I didn't have anything, just me and the robots. We started right away, but that sometimes happens. Then there's the head, which is the melody, and that happens once or sometimes twice, depending on the tune. Then almost everybody improvises. You kind of go around in a circle or whatever. You kind of rotate through people and you improvise, and that's what you heard me do after I played the written melody once. I played, I think, 2 courses of improvisation, and then the last time through is the head again, and if it was twice the first time, it's twice the last time. And then there's some sort of ending at the end. For me, I just hit that last note, and I kind of added a different chord there or whatever. But there's usually some sort of something, fermata is the last note or whatever. And so that's kind of stuff that you work out with the rest of your combo people. But that's kind of the scope of the things that happen in a jazz combo tune. And now let's dive in and figure out what it is that jazz piano players have to do, what their role is. It's a very unique role. So this video will just be about the first step on your list there. It's about, it says there underneath the 3 plus more responsibilities, accompanying the melody and soloists. That's what this one's about. So what is that? Well, in the jazz world, we call that comping, which is short for the word, or accompanying is short. The shortened version of that is comping. So what does that mean when we comp? Well, we do 2 things. One, we play the chords, the harmony, and we also kind of contribute to the rhythm, to the groove of it. So we do both of those things. And not other people generally don't do that. Drums play groove-oriented stuff, and the bass player does play some harmonic things, but they don't play more than 1 note at a time, typically. And they contribute to the groove by playing usually just straight quarter notes when when it's a swing tune. So, so we have kind of a unique role in that, similar to guitar players too. So the first thing we need to understand is part A there is demystifying the hieroglyphics. So for example, if you're looking at the tune there, you'll see like the first chord there will say above the music, it'll say B flat 7. And we need to figure out like what that means and what to do with it, right? So I'm going to slide this a bit. So there are 3 kind of main chords that we need to, for today, be responsible to understand, and that'll get us through maybe like 90% of the stuff that we ever really need to know as far as comping. Okay, so the first, let's actually pretend that we're in the key of C for a second, and here are the 3 basic chord qualities. And for the next minute, I'll talk about these. So if you know these, you should just skip ahead 1 minute. If you've never seen these before, then you should for sure stay tuned. So C with this triangle 7, or sometimes you'll see C and it'll have kind of slappily written M-A-J, C major 7. Any of those is fine. And that's called C major 7. C major 7. And that's the easiest one to figure out. So if I'm in, this is my treble clef, if I'm in C, I just go C, E, G, and B. C major triad is the first 3, so I'll do that to the side here. So you start with just your major triad. Triad because there's 3 notes there, and you just make them perfectly stacked on each other in intervals of thirds to make a chord, a basic triad chord. And then, because there's a 7 here, that means that I add the 7th note of my C major scale. So, think about the piano for a second. C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, and you keep going up, and so B is the 7th. So that's why we add the 7th. And it's called major 7 because this is the easiest one. We don't have to do anything. As long as we know what's in the key of C, we can just throw the notes on the page and we call it good. We don't need to make any adjustments. We will need to adjust these ones moving forward. But this one is the easiest one. As long as you know what's in the key of whatever this is, then you just throw the rest of the notes on it. Okay? Okay, the second one is called C7, or you could say C dominant. Either of those terms, you hear them interchangeably, so you probably want to know both of those, C7 or C dominant 7. So we take that C major triad just like we did earlier here, but the C7 or C dominant 7 means we lower the 7th from what it was earlier. So when it's naturally in the wild, it's just going to be whatever it is in the key of C, and then when we make it dominant, we take that 7th and we lower it by 1/2 step. So it usually just means we add a flat, not always. Okay, and then the last one is how we say that, C minor 7, and that means that we take those same 4 notes, but we make the first triad, we make it minor. And if you've ever dealt with minor before, then this will be very familiar with you. But in a nutshell, minor basically means, for now, that we take the 3rd note of the scale and we lower it by 1/2 step. So like a quick aside, in a different key or something like that. Let's say we're in the key of, I don't know, how about like G? Let's pretend that we're in the key of G. And we wanted a G minor triad. Well, we take the 3rd of the chord and we lower it by 1/2 step to make it minor. Okay. Okay, so C minor here, so we lower the 3rd, and then the 7 means the same thing the 7 did over there. We lower that also. So we lower the 7th and we lower the 3rd. That makes it C minor triad. So hopefully that makes sense. There are other chords out there, and for today we're not going to worry about them, but there are. And then sometimes in your music, it might say like C, or well, I say over here. It'd say C7, and then there might be some additional instructions in parentheses. And for now, let's not worry too much about it. But basically, you're gonna eventually it'll say like sharp 9 or something like that. So if you don't want to know about that right now, it's fine. But what that would mean is when we eventually do some voicings, whatever we were playing with the 9th, we're gonna raise that by 1/2 step. But for now, just you don't need to worry about it too much unless you're ready for that. Okay, so that's what we need to know, in terms of just kind of some basic chord structure. So you go back to your tune. So if you have that handy, the Tenor Madness tune, the first chord there is B flat 7. So if you've never comped before and you've never played in a combo before where you've had to do that, just pay attention for a second to my right hand, not my left hand. This will be the bass line. But just listen for a moment to what the right hand is doing. You get the gist. I didn't demonstrate it earlier. 2, 1, 2, 3. So that was the same form. But what my right hand was doing was those two things we talked about earlier. I was adding rhythm, and I'm supplying the harmony. So what we're doing now with this B flat chord is we're figuring out what I was doing with that right hand, but right now we're figuring out what notes to play. So here we go. If you've never done this before, and let's say you had to play a performance and it was in, like 5 minutes and you had to figure out what was going on, then this is what you would do. You'd figure out what this chord was, and I would just play it in whatever your dominant hand is, and just use one hand for now. So, so you can kind of think through this with me. So we start with just like kind of the shape of it, right? And it's B flat, so we're going to have that flat down there. In the key of B flat, there are 2 flats, and so it doesn't affect either of those 2 notes. And I know from my earlier description that if there's just a 7 after the letter, but there's nothing in between it, that just means I lower the 7th. I'll say that again. So if there's a 7 after the letter, and there's nothing in between it, which just means we lower the 7th note when we're figuring out a chord. So for example, like a different example would be like, let's do, how about F7? We'll do that later anyway. There's the letter and the number and nothing in between it. So I take the normal chord that would happen in the key of F, and I just lower the 7th there. Okay. So anyway, back to our B flat example. So if you haven't done this before, what I was just doing is pausing and going through and figuring out all of the chords in the tune. And let's see if you wind up with the ones that I'll draw out. So we did the B flat, E flat 7 would look like this. I'm going to get rid of this and just use accidentals. B flat, look like that. And then later you have, I showed you the F, and C minor would look like this. I showed you that one too, I guess. Okay, so those are the chords that you would need to have. So hopefully that made sense to you, how you figure that out. And then the first thing that you would do then is you can just write those chords in, or make your own music out of the staff paper and just write in all of those chords, so like you have your own personal music that you're looking at, not necessarily the melody. Okay, so that's step 1. Let's say you already knew all of that and you're ready for the next thing. So here we go. Let's take the first B flat 7. And I'm going to, just as a reference, you can see that, yeah. So B flat would look like that. What we need to start to do now is use both hands. And what we do is we put, generally speaking, this is kind of like a little formula here. These 2 notes right here are really important. Well, they're all really important, but the bass player is going to play the root for us, and a lot of times anyway. So these 2 notes are what are called the guide tones. That's a very important word or concept to understand, the guide tones. And in short, it's because the 3rd of the chord and the 7th of the chord determine what chord quality it is, right? It makes it sound minor, or it makes it sound major, or it makes it sound dominant, or a bunch of other ones too. So what happens is we take those 2, the 3rd and the 7th, of the scale, of a B flat scale, and we throw it into our left hand, like that. So see how I did that? So I took the D and I threw it, so that, sorry, pretend it's bass clef, right? So I put the D there and I put the A flat there. And then over here, I take the other two notes that I didn't, it's going to get a little messy, but let's take the other two notes I didn't deal with, and I'll just leave them there, B flat and F. Does that make sense? So I kind of, what happens here is I took, there's like 4 notes, and I took 2 of them, and I slid them down in my left hand, so I spaced everything out. It's a different kind of chord quality, so I'll play a second for you here. Kind of listen to the difference between these. So this is that first version. It kind of sounds like, if I have the piano sound turned up on iReal Pro, it kind of sounds like robotic, right? It just sounds like, you know, just sort of the alien version of just playing, okay, I got to play those notes. We start to separate it out, though. It kind of adds some complexity to it. So I think, what's the exact voicing? I have that one. That sounds a lot different than, start to spread things out. Hopefully you can hear that difference there. And then the third step will be, we can, then once we have this basic formula, we can adjust some of the mostly the right hand notes to add even more color to what we're doing. So, but if this is totally new to you, this takes some definite like mental calculus, so don't worry about, you can just hit pause and come back later to this moment in the video and then move on to the next thing when you're ready. But feel free to just go through and do the math and this formula for all of them. One other thing that's worth mentioning is that the fact that this is the 3rd and the 7th, it doesn't matter that it's 3rd and 7th. Like they can be inverted. So what I mean is it could be like, for example, you could go like A flat and D in the left hand like that, and then the right hand you could, you know, I don't know, you could go F and B flat. As long as it's those notes, it doesn't matter where they are in your right hand or left hand. If that makes sense. So it doesn't. So the inversion with one hand doesn't really matter. Okay, so if that's new to you, then kind of go through and figure that all out for all of those chords, and then if you want to move on to the next thing, here's another thing. So step 3 would be, if you knew all these first steps already, is we make the basic chord have a little bit more color to it. And how we do that is we take the left hand and we keep it the same. And the first step I always tell people is to get rid of the root and replace it with the ninth. With the ninth. What is the ninth? Well, 1 is the root. And if you go up the scale, 8 is that same root but up an octave. So 9 is the ninth note of the scale, which is the same thing as the second scale degree. It's the same thing as the second scale. Why don't we just call it the second scale degree? It's a good question. I think the main reason is that jazz harmony, I don't know, I mean, whatever. So jazz harmony is kind of like stacked in thirds, like this. And so so we want this note to be, this C is the ninth of this, and so we want to be well above the root, not like tucked in right with the root. We want it to be above the root. It's like an extension, like an added harmony above all that stuff. So we don't want it to hang out in the bass area. We want it to be above all that. So that's why we call it the ninth and not the second. As you get older, sometimes you'll see like add 2, but okay, whatever. All right, so we replaced the root with the ninth. That's a great first step, and I think we'll leave it at that for now. The world of jazz voicing is huge, and I'll talk more about some further resources for you. And then I guess I just can't help myself. I think the last thing I'd say, if you're looking for another thing, once you've added, or once you've taken the ninth, or you put the ninth in, then you can, at liberty, like add the root back in. You can add it back in. But it's nice because then you have that additional like kind of color already. So you add that extra thing, and it kind of sort of fills out the sound. Like this sounds a lot different than this chord. You can hopefully hear. And kind of the gold standard for jazz voicings is that you're doing ultimately like 5-note voicings, which is this one. Okay, so all that said, how are we doing on time? We're hanging in there. Okay, so that was just part A, but the next parts will be faster. So that was demystifying the hieroglyphics. Look at part B. What is hip? Good question. We talked about the voicings. We just did that. And now we got, so we figured out what notes to play, but now we have to figure out, well, what rhythms do I play? How do I decide that? I wrote a couple of generalisms here. We want lots of ands and less downbeats generally. There definitely are downbeats, but for the most part, like 70 to 30% or 80 to 20 or something like that, you want more ands. So here's that example again. Part of it, 2, 1, 2, 3. So most of the time I was playing the ands. I probably even overdid it a little bit. And it's a nice compliment because the bass player is always playing the downbeats. So it kind of gives it that swing if we can add those ands in there. So part 2 there is a healthy mix of long and short notes. So I wrote on the thing extra melody-like notes. I was doing that earlier a little bit too. It's easier to do with 2 hands. I'm going to show you. So you were hearing that mostly in like my pinky or a couple top fingers of my right hand, upper fingers of my right hand. The notes that we'll play is, we'll talk about it in the improvisation portion, but you can kind of throw those in between the voicings that you're choosing. Okay, so then the last step there is to just write out a couple of sample rhythms, okay? Because it's still like, as I wrote on there, it's paralysis of choice. What note, or what, I mean, there's just so many options here. So here's a couple of ones that if you're looking for a place to start, you can copy these down and work with these. So the first one that I had there is a good one. Similar would be that. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's a rest in there, This is a little harder, but you can do like that. 1 and 3, and 3, and 3. Let's go down here and do maybe one more. Oh, whoops. Eighth. One, two, three, four. Yeah. So assuming we're in 4/4. So if you just, you don't need to know a lot. If you had just a couple of those rhythms under your tool belt and kind of like varied them up every now and then it would sound like a pretty nice, convincing, comping chorus. But I would practice it by just choosing like one rhythm and playing that rhythm like for a chorus or two until you really feel super comfortable with it. And then play another chorus of like the second rhythm and play that one for choruses at a time until you feel really, really good about it. And the third one, etc., that kind of thing. Ultimately, there'll be an element where you're listening so well to the person that is soloing or improvising or playing the melody that you'll really interact with them at a high level. But just to build the technique and the like kind of the dexterity, just the agileness to be able to play like that stuff. Just work on these kind of core rhythms there, and you can also take rhythms from your jazz. If you're in jazz band, take like any rhythms that they wrote out for you in a swing tune, and just practice those rhythms. It's just so that all these rhythms feel like really comfortable and natural and they just happen. Okay. All right, so look at the next one, technique, thick and even-handed. It's really easy if you're right-handed to play the right hand loud and left hand not loud, like 2, 3, 4. And hopefully you could hear the right hand was way louder than the left hand, and the same thing is true of the left hand. If you're left-handed, it could be way louder. So every finger needs to be like the same volume. And you really listen to what you're playing and see, is it really sound like that, or does it sound like I'm, left or right or left-handed or something like that. If you happen to be a percussionist, because a lot of piano players and jazz band are percussionists, the equivalent for you would be if you're playing a mallet instrument and you're doing a scale, and a person could tell what handed dominant you are because it sounds like bum, 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 like you're right-handed clearly or something like that. It's the same concept with here. You want to make sure nobody knows what handedness you are. It should be total mystery. I talked about that second point already. We articulate too, we sure do, and we kind of already talked about that. Part D is how do we think of voicings on the fly? That's a whole deal. There's no magic bullets, I'm sorry to say, but I do know that in order to, if you're given a piece of music and, it's got a whole bunch of chords on there, but there's not written out, you got to figure it out. What do we do? Scales have to be automatic. Like I chose pretty simpler scales, band scales earlier, but you might play something that's in the key of A, and you just have to know like what's in my A scale, and then you have a D chord. Okay, what's in my D scale? Or an E chord, what's in my E scale? So just knowing your scales, I think, would be the first step to feeling really comfortable with figuring out the chords. And then the very last thing that's worth mentioning about the chord stuff that we haven't yet already is that last thing on there, part D, number 3, and I usually call it actually like streamlining. And what I mean by that is, let's say you figured out in your thing, let's say you like B flat or whatever, and let's say I'm going to go with that last voicing we did. But no worries, if you didn't get to this part of the video earlier, just bear with me, you'll get it. Let's say I figured that out. Okay, I feel pretty good about that one. That looks pretty good, sounds pretty good. So my next voicing, I figured it out, and I'm going to go with, how about, this. And if you think about that, you just look at it, as a piano player, that would be pretty tricky because it requires a lot. I mean, those are hard notes to eyeball and make sure you nail it, and that's true. And they kind of sound disjunct too, right? So here's the first one. Like I even missed 2 or 3 of those. I wasn't looking at it. You should be able to do it without having to look at it, ideally. So it sounds disjunct and it moves all around. So we want to try to avoid that. And over time, piano players have kind of streamlined their voicing. So it means they take the notes that they want to play, but they try to find like the shortest possible destination, the shortest possible route, I should say, from one to the other. So wouldn't it make more sense if we kept, like in the left hand, we kept the D and we put it to D flat because it's right there in the neighborhood. And instead of playing that low G, wouldn't it make more sense if we just went from A flat to G here? That'd be way easier, right? The notes we want here are F, B flat, and E flat. Well, wouldn't it make more sense? You could keep the F right there and keep the B flat, sure. But wouldn't it make more sense to just play the E flat like right there instead? Instead of jumping all the way up there. It's way easier. It's not the end of the world if you don't do that, and every now and then it's actually fine, but if you just do that all the time, you're always jumping around, then it's going to sound kind of unsettling, so you need to kind of figure out the best pathway to do it. Okay. All right, so that's it on that, and we'll move on to the next video here in a second.